If you're into ancient history, you might have seen something like this, or this, or this. These are alabaster reliefs that lined the walls of the great Assyrian palaces. Thanks to a number of successful exhibitions, like I Am Ashurnasirpal, King of the World, King of Assyria, and popular books, these have garnered a fair bit of attention from the public, but not many know of their storied lives and the political institutions that formed them. It was the year 934 BC, and King Ashurdan II had just come to the throne of Assyria. The kingdom he inherited was not the great empire we know it to be, and most of its glory days seemed to have fallen behind. However, he longed to reassert the might of his god Ashur and bring the conquered lands of centuries past back under the divine yoke. Through a series of annual campaigns, the extent of his realm began to expand, and valuable commodities became accessible to his people. This legacy of conquest continued under his son, Adad-nirari II, and in turn under Adad-nirari's son, Tukulti-Ninurta II. Such was the great Assyrian Reconquista. Ultimately, this legacy of powerful kings would culminate with one of the most famous Assyrian conquering heroes, Ashurnasirpal II. Though well known to his contemporary audiences for his fierce militaristic attitude, his most famous achievement in modern eyes is the creation of these alabaster reliefs. Perhaps the slab's journey began during the campaign to the Mediterranean and Carchemish. Ashurnasirpal had paraded triumphantly to far-off lands, collecting gold and timber as tribute on his trek to the sea. While in the city of Carchemish, it is likely he took some inspiration from the native decorations. Large stone slabs lined up at the base of the walls in important religious and administrative buildings. With his spoils from out west, he returned with fresh inspiration and fine materials with which to build his new palace at Kalhu. His new palace project was not like those of his forefathers, however. It was part of a larger plan to relocate the Assyrian capital, and it had to be a spectacular undertaking. The foundations of the old buildings were leveled to create space for his construction program. On the north side of the mound, a temple to Ninurta was erected, with Ashurnasirpal's palace just to the south and a great ziggurat to the north. Lining the walls of the Ninurta temple and the palace were hundreds of alabaster slabs. Some were divided into 2 registers and depicted military events. Others portrayed the king in ritual settings using just 1 register. Some were simply blank. Across the middle of all of these, sculptors carved the king's standard inscription, which was composed of the full royal titulary, a short account of Ashurnasirpal's military campaigns, and the construction of his new capital. 2 variations of the inscription exist, A and B. Version B was either an update to reflect the king's most recent accomplishments, or the results of a different team of workmen, but does not differ from A in very significant ways. The new tradition of carving slabs became a staple of Assyrian royal palaces from here on out, but its purposes and form evolved in important ways. Ashurnasirpal's palace was, at its heart, a display of power. From the great timbers in the ceiling to the writing on the walls, his work exuded power, one necessary to acquire the riches for such a palace. The continuous band of writing on the walls was indicative of a complex scribal culture. Very few institutions in the Near East could employ the number of scholars, scribes, and sculptors to generate such a multitude of these slabs. Even an illiterate visitor would be able to marvel at the sheer number of texts and understand the royal authority it conveyed. In addition to inscriptions on the front, slabs had shorter summaries on the back. These engravings would reveal to future generations of kings his mighty deeds and identify the slabs as his handiwork. Ashurnasirpal II saw a lot of his greatness in his military power, but he was also the shepherd of a great people. The iconography on the walls of his palace show violence and peace, the subjugation of those far beyond, and the management of his home. His primary concern was to uphold his people and bring prosperity into the heartland of Assyria. The reliefs in his palace were a vehicle in which he could demonstrate his proper fulfillment of the role of kingship and legitimize himself before his court and enemy officials. It is doubtful the common citizen would ever cast a glance at these great palace carvings, but in the event they did, the message would be clear. Ashurnasirpal II was shepherd of his people, divinely appointed by the god Ashur to rule justly and bring the adjacent territories from chaos into order through violence. If you're interested in learning more about Assyrian palace reliefs, make sure to subscribe, as I'll be releasing part 2 in the coming weeks, where the reliefs of other famous Assyrian kings, like Ashurbanipal, will be coming into focus.